Ukraine is grateful to the United States for its overwhelming support, for all that your state and your people have already done for our freedom, for weapons and ammunition, for training and funding, for leadership in the free world, which helps put pressure on the aggressor economically. Today, the Ukrainian people are defending not only Ukraine. We are fighting for the values of Europe and the world, sacrificing our lives in the name of the future. That's why today the American people are helping not just Ukraine, but Europe and the world to keep the planet alive, to keep justice in history. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being on the right side of history.
Thank you. The Wait 1 second to put this back. There's a website that I want to share with y'all. I hope it's actually also on the handouts that I gave you. There's a blue and white brochure, and also the red and white brochure is about the Holodomor, which I will talk to you about shortly. But the national website for Ukraine is war.ukraine.ua. And here you can go to, they're already on the 49th day because they're 8 hours ahead. But this website is a place where you can go and get up to the minute activities and important events for you to review. It's also a way for Ukraine to document the war crimes and to have a chronological way of keeping everything in place. Ukraine clearly will bring, already has started bringing war crimes to and atrocities that are occurring in Ukraine under legal action. So this is an important site if anyone wants to kind of check in and not have to scroll through Twitter or whatever social media that you're using. We all know how much propaganda is out there in this world. Never used to know the word propaganda until, what, about 10 years ago or so? But we're all dealing with it now. And we know where it started. So it's basically, that's the way of life in Russia. That's just the way the Soviet Union ran. That's how control was kept over the countries, is through propaganda. And it is now a reality in our world. But you cannot hide or deny the atrocities that are witnessed by people. And the atrocities that are happening in Ukraine are inhumane. And they're being done by someone who obviously has no care for humanity. And I don't think any person that is a dictator really cares too much about humanity. It's all about themselves. So if you would spend some time looking through the website, you'll see more images that I'm sure so many of y'all have already seen. There's information media that you can share. And what Russia says and what it actually means are two different things. We all saw and heard so many times when Russia was amassing along the Ukrainian border how they would say they would not invade Ukraine. It's a pretext. It's almost the opposite. If they say one thing, you expect the opposite. And Ukrainians know the Russian tactics very well. And we are all very proud of President Zelensky. I don't think anybody, either in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, expected him to stand up and be the man of the hour as he is, and the man of 49 days that he has become, the leader that he has shown and kept. If you can just imagine, because I've thought about this, I would say I'm having such a hard time dealing with what's going on in Ukraine, and I'm not getting bombarded, and I don't hear the sirens 24/7, and I don't have to look at pictures and worry about my family that is in another location every day. but he is, and he's maintaining, and he has done a wonderful job in communicating the needs of the Ukrainian people to the world. And for that, I think every Ukrainian is grateful. And for that, I think, is what also makes Putin very mad. Because he, obviously, we all know, the war has not gone according to the way that he had hoped. He thought this was going to be done in a week, 3 days, I think. And so Ukrainians are formidable fighters. When you're fighting for your freedom, when you're fighting for your family, you'll put your life on the line. And that's what they have done, every one of them. And when you see images of people standing in front of the tanks and still have to go on, even though you see all the atrocities that you're seeing amongst you, and then the children, and how on earth they can even deny any of these things, and they still are. Russia is still denying all of these atrocities, saying that it's fake news. And that is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a country that is run by a dictator that does not live in the same reality that we do. So how do you deal with it? How do we end this war? And no one, I don't believe, has the answer. Of course, we all have our ideas of how we would like to see it end. But I think ultimately what we do have to come to realization is we take all of the top experts, generals, the United States and other countries. We have to rely on NATO. We have to rely on what our government is doing with the intelligence that they do have, and hope that this is going to make a difference. But I think in general, it's very difficult when we can see that their oil depots were blown up. There's not enough machinery to go around. They need to be resupplied on a consistent basis. And I can only hope, in Ukraine and everyone around the world can only hope that the neighboring countries, and there's no reason why other countries can't step up as well. They don't have to be part of Europe. This does not just affect NATO countries. This does not just affect the United States. This affects every freedom-loving country of the world. If we value our freedom, we, and as many have already come up, should fight alongside Ukraine. Because Ukraine is putting their land, their people, their children, their historical sites, their churches, their hospitals, and the nuclear weaponry. Ukraine has got the third largest nuclear plant facilities in Europe. And it came very, very close to a catastrophic situation a couple weeks ago. I don't know, again, how much each of y'all are following what goes on a daily basis over there, because there's always something going on, but you should. Because now, thank God, they've retreated from the Chernobyl, and of course Chernobyl is just 80 miles north of Kyiv, and we all know what Chernobyl has done to the world. There was a very high risk of that, those reactors exploding because they turned the electricity off. And who does that? But they did get secured again, and thank you for that. Zaporizhzhia has another area of nuclear plants, and they got very close to being bombed. It just seemed like the bombing was happening without too much. Now, there was consistency on targeting important locations by the Russians. As a matter of fact, it was the largest plane ever built, was built on Ukrainian territory, and it was a plane that was given the name Peace, Maria, and it was hit. So that plane no longer will fly. There was a church that is older than the United States, I may have mentioned that, that was hit within a couple days. So there's a lot of countries that stand with Ukraine, and we are grateful for that, because I think they understand the importance of this. And I believe every one of us, if you haven't said it, I know you have felt it, that this is evil. And we have to support and do everything we can to stop the evil that is going on in Ukraine. Nobody in their right mind could be doing any good with what is happening, and the amount of brutality that is happening. And I don't want to go into detail. I'm sure most of y'all have read some of the atrocities that have been coming out about things that happen in Bucha. So as a final note, I did want to get back to one important aspect of Ukrainian history. And let me just get back to that site. Back to the Ukrainian American Society of Texas, UAST.org. You can go visit the Ukrainian Genocide tab. You know, I think I must have lost internet. Oh, there it is. Okay. This just came up today. You know, before I came here, I got a call, and one of my friends said to me, "You've got to put this in front of your group." On April 3rd, Russia issued a genocide handbook for its war on Ukraine. According to Timothy Snyder, and some of you may have heard Timothy Snyder is the Richard C. Levin Professor of History at Yale University and a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. He said the Russian official press agency RIA Novosti published an explicit program for the complete elimination of the Ukrainian nation as such. And I've got a link there for y'all, so you can read this at your leisure. But it has the translated document in English that you can reach into and read, because we have already seen why are the civilians being targeted, why are hospitals and tall buildings being targeted, and it is to target the civilians. So the Holodomor, which follows just right below that, is a genocide, a horrific genocide that happened under then dictator, Russian dictator Joseph Stalin. This happened in 1932-33 when they brought collectivization into the Soviet Union, where everyone had to work for the good of the Soviet Union and the government. Ukraine was a huge producer of wheat, and they wanted to sell wheat at a high level to provide enough funds to industrialize the Soviet Union. Well, the Ukrainians did not want to take part in that process. They wanted to be compensated for their work. They were farmers and they put a lot of work into it. Well, the Ukrainian resistance was something that Joseph Stalin would not stand for. And so he closed off the borders of Ukraine. And he sold all the grain in the silos to the rest of the world. And in a year and a half, over 10 million Ukrainians died, at 28,000 dead a day. At the time, New York Times writer Walter Duranty was sent over to Ukraine, but he was also on the payroll of the Soviet Union. He came back and publicized that there was no famine. As a matter of fact, he was set up in a village in Ukraine, and there was plenty of food around. Of course, later there was found out that it was staged. But other journalists like Gareth Brooks and others did document the Ukrainian famine. It was an artificial famine, and it was a horrific genocide that I think has not been mentioned enough and is not taught in schools enough, and we're working on that. But I do, if you have some time to visit the New Dallas Holocaust Museum in downtown Dallas, please do. First off, we need to remember any genocide because we know that history repeats itself. But also, there is a permanent exhibit, and I have taken pictures of it here for you to see. It's on our website, of the Holodomor at the Dallas Holocaust Museum in downtown Dallas. So please visit that, learn more about the Ukrainian Holodomor, and keep that in your mind and prayers, because Ukraine has suffered tragedies beyond comprehension. And with this most recent, Putin basically is announcing that he's going to do genocide in Ukraine. And that's horrible. That's horrific. And we hope that that does not happen. And we hope the world will intervene and help Ukraine. I think at the end of the day, we all want peace, and I think we all agree that every country that is sovereign deserves to have peace and be independent. And we do not want countries like North Korea, Iran, Syria, China, or some of the other dictator-run countries in the world to think it's okay to do what Putin's doing, because they're watching. And we have to keep the balance of good versus evil in this world. So please, don't turn your head when you hear things going on about Ukraine, because this will eventually affect each and every one of us. Already, because of the grain shortages that will be coming, because Ukraine and Russia both are top grain producers for the world, the countries that need the food the most will be suffering first. So South Africa, Zimbabwe, other countries that really need the food will not be getting their supply. And that pretty much concludes my presentation today. I hope that I was able to at least give you some perspective on Ukraine as a country, and also the war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Anybody have any brief questions for Mr. Lofton, anything?
Would you please share with us your sentiment from your family and friends? What is Putin's big game with Ukraine and the surrounding Soviet satellites?
Well, Ukraine strategically is a very important country that Russia needs in order to be a superpower, which Putin laments. He cannot stand the idea that the Soviet Union collapsed. He values and is connected to the Tsarist empires and wants to have Russia great again. And that's what he preaches to his Russian people. So Ukraine on its path to democracy does not fill that agenda. And as long as Putin was able to keep control of Ukraine to a certain extent, and that's why it took such a long time, by the way, for Ukraine to get away from that concept that Ukraine was a corrupt country. Ukrainians are not that type of people, but the Russian government that ruled the former Soviet Union was. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine was left with the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world on their soil. So in 1994, the United States, Great Britain, and Russia signed a nuclear proliferation agreement called the Budapest Memorandum. And for all of you that are into legalities, Ukraine felt like this was a security because they vowed to keep the borders of Ukraine sovereign and to protect Ukraine from any invasions. Unfortunately, when the first time Russia attacked Ukraine and annexed the Crimea in 2014, Ukraine said, "What about the Budapest Memorandum? Russia signed this agreement. They cannot just come and attack us." But unfortunately, the security guarantees were not enforceable. So Ukraine did not at that time have weapon buildup. The former president that was run out of the country, Yanukovych, was purposely keeping the military weak because he was under Putin's control. He was a puppet government. But during the Orange Revolution, which happened in 2008, Ukrainians stood up, realized that they were being controlled by a puppet government, and demonstrated and overturned the government, because there was an election for Yushchenko, which did not come to fruition. It was, I can't remember the opponent's name at that time. But they overturned the election results, and Yushchenko, who was more of a democratic president, won. And of course, that didn't sit well with Putin, because that means he doesn't have as much control over Ukraine if it's a democratically elected president. Yushchenko got poisoned. But fortunately, he recovered, and you can still see, if you see pictures of him, he's got, the pit pulls in his skin from the dioxin? I'm not sure what the chemical was that they used. So that was in 2008. Strides were made by Ukraine towards democracy, and they wanted to join NATO, but at that time, NATO did not want to upset Putin. I don't really know exactly why they didn't allow Ukraine into NATO. It would have been a good thing if they did, because we wouldn't be in this situation, but they didn't. And in 2014 was yet another time where the Ukrainians were aspiring to be part of the European Union. And we're being told by the president at that time, that was Yanukovych, and at the last minute, he announced to the people that, well, we're going to put it off. That didn't sit well with the Ukrainian people, and they had a revolution, and it was called the Revolution of Dignity. They felt like, as dignified citizens of a country, they deserve to be heard. They deserve to have the democratic ways of the countries that they aspire to be like. And so Yanukovych was given his orders from Putin to stop the demonstrations. And so the Russian military came in, the snipers, and killed young men and women. They were students mainly that were in Kiev studying, and they went to the Maidan, to the Independence Square, and with their own hands, and Molotov cocktails and built up of tires, retaliated against the Russian puppet president. And I remember reading about that, and there was no mention later of this one very brave Ukrainian young man that stood up and said, I am going to go into and personally pull him out of this building myself. And he was just fearless. But they managed to get him out of the building, and you could see where papers were floating down the river in Kiev because they were trying to destroy evidence of a lot of bad stuff. So that road to democracy is what scares Putin. He cannot afford to have democracy at his base, at his what do you say, doorstep. Thank you. I was looking for the word. So if democracy comes that close, then he's fearful that his own people are going to want democracy, which is what he's been controlling against all these years. And there is Navalny who stood up against Putin and tried to go and be head to head in the democratic, supposedly that was their form of democracy, elections, because they wanted to prove to the world that they also were democratic, was a democratic country, but it was all rigged. So Navalny was also poisoned, but he survived, and now he is jailed in a Russian prison. But Putin, foremost, wants to see a return of greatness. And the reason why he has come out with this rhetoric that Ukrainians and Russians are the same is because he wants to be able to have a reason why this war makes sense to his people in Russia. So he has claimed that there are Nazis and all of these right-wing people that live in Ukraine, and he's got to go in and clean them out, which is the furthest from the truth, obviously. And yet, surprisingly, and I was talking to someone earlier who said, well, there's so many Russians that are not for this war. And yes, in the beginning, when this war started, you saw that people come out in Russia demonstrating against the war. But I can tell you, based on what is showing now, the majority of Russians are for this war. And that is the scary part. Well, we were all hopeful that maybe they would, stand up against Putin, overthrow Putin, and that would be the end of the war, but that's not going to happen. Because the majority of them are for this war. There was a demonstration in Germany just a few days ago where the pro-Russian demonstrators were outnumbered the Ukrainian demonstrators. So we may see more of that. I hope I answered your question. I may have gone a little bit over
No, you did a
time.
great job. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. We're adjourned. If everybody could turn their name tags in, I'd appreciate it. Thank everybody for coming.
One more announcement. I forgot to mention something. I'm sorry.
Sure, go
It was
ahead.
just mentioned. I didn't come here for any suggestions or donations, but I did want to point out that if you go to Help Ukraine on our website here, you'll notice that there are some nonprofit organizations that are set up. They have been vetted. They are getting weapons into Ukraine. They're getting humanitarian aid working with Poland. So if you do feel like you want to visit the website and and directly, you can make a donation to them, or you can go to the national website for Ukraine, and they also have information to their bank account because they are buying weapons directly themselves. They're not going to have enough weapons, and that is the biggest fear right now that President Zelensky has, is that the weapons that are coming in are being used, and a lot of them are also being destroyed. You can't reuse something that's gotten blown up. And so anything that you can do to help out, I think would be wonderful. And I do have some more of these left. If anybody wanted to take some home, come visit me. And I have some bumper stickers. If anybody wants to have a bumper sticker. I know it's not in style anymore, but if you did, I had a printer who said, I just want to give you some, and it says support Ukraine. So thank you again very much. Like on our UASG, I have a section for rallies. Because one man can't change. Talking about Kaliningrad?
She's talking about tank defense.
Because they're coming in and that's the platform that they have. So there was a document that I brought, and again, there was no but this document, you can read it, this talks about why you put in the position of geopolitical and what happens if they get compared to blacks. To get into that. Before we go well, and, you know, he's just so we were one short. Well, you know, because that's why you're pregnant and Polish people Well, I could go on and on, but it's kind of like I was noticing some people were like, I really don't. I tried to move it along because, you know, I wanted to throw a little bit of history in it, because what is really important is that I get people to understand is that we just didn't exist during slavery. That we're an old ancient country, and there's an ancient civilization, which is free, consistent in What?
Like you mentioned, Josh, you'll see what's happening.
Oh, gotcha, I was gonna say, that's the news. Yeah, I had no idea what that was. Yeah. Original, 40 years ago. Yeah, it comes from Oh, okay. Maybe that was back in the day, I guess not.
What's up, guys?
And we came under the Polish rule at the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're still doing it.
You're welcome. Ladies, thank you for reaching out. You want to take a photo? Nobody's doing bumper stickers anymore. Yeah, why not? I'm not gonna say all this stuff, but thank you.
Paula, thank you.
Sorry, I moved on. Shots off.
I teach her too much. I really promise her, but in between she's not. I think she's working for you. I'm 100% trying. I know, but listen. Trying to get it not for me.
Yes.
The way he writes is amazing. It's really, really neat. So,
I don't wanna lie, because I am strictly afraid of this. You like to help out, and that's what I, and that's just another time that I've got to be a couple hours long.
lost my, lost my.
But she did mention that chair squeeze.
It's
And the one
that's
that
the treatment that.
She did mention that.
No, no, no,
You don't have to lie to me. You told me what she does. You told me she uses a percolated coffee maker. She won't even buy your Starbucks.
Yeah.
She's so sorry.
Yeah, but
So bad.
yes and no,
The powdered cream, not even the real stuff. I mean, open up the purse, let the money out. This poor woman.
that tells, yeah, that tells, I have like.
You have a child who's great special and.
You mentioned, remind me.
It's not really much talk at all.
Jamie, this is a pleasure. Do you work with all or just one? That explains quite a bit.
So anyway, it's,
In the back, is it in the back?
so she just needs to get out. Cold weather and cloud cover, that's all. No wind. No wind.
So next thing, my dog.
Cloud cover. It's a hard, yeah. Those courses are, they try to DQ on or usually point downhill. This has what's called,
My wife went to this place. Good to see you again. It's always fun to see you. You're starting at my office in Willow Monday. You are signed for getting 2 weeks.
street sign. It's like 4 signs.
I got a brother of 4 miles. Why don't I say, must be done with this now? You should be the boss.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm supposed to be walking around.
Yes, yes.
And then buy my own coffee.
Pray for peace on it.
I know, right?
I know, checked on his website, making it very.
I would be delighted for the three of us. If I'm not going to the grandma's, we're not going to your little, we're not going to your little corn nutty restaurant, we're gonna go to some potato cloth. So I think that idea is very encouraging. I think it's encouraging because it frankly helps the bar too. It helps transition more and it takes the pressure off the people that don't know what they're doing and helps them too. Sure. So, understand this, in this conversation, I am the email or text message, I am not the city manager. I know I get a lot of attention here, but I'm not president, vice president, treasurer, executive committee, vice president, department general, I'm just treasurer. But, those guys listen to me. I think it'd be a win-win-win. We would have fun being back involved. I think we would be blessed to be back involved. And I think honestly, the biggest hurdle would be, well, our association doesn't want. I think it helped them too. Clearly, we can't be the only organization experiencing this level of dysfunction. Right? Okay.
So, all right, so we will talk, we're almost at the end of the Mainland year.
Yes. Krista, you did a fantastic job.
Oh, this is tremendous.
Good morning.
And is this, any feedback, is your blouse part of, this is your?
My mother actually embroidered this one. Right here, I actually embroidered 2 in my lifetime, but they, that was my mother's.
Oh, wow. Oh, you should have worn that the whole time. That's extraordinary. So that would be one piece I got out. Is over there.
Show off the blouse.
So I'm a trial attorney, I'm a publisher. I would have emphasized more of the second half of your stuff than the first half. You know, I think it's okay to talk about sunflowers and the tribe and these other things. I would have condensed that. I think the audience wanted to hear more about the Holocaust, which you did a great job on. They want to hear more about the end where you really, that was really, you got on a roll there. That was really great. The other thing would be, I would de-emphasize, go to the website, go to the website, go to the website. People are here to hear you. Instead of going to the website, they want to hear your heart. So whenever your heart got rolling, the room stopped and stared. It was wonderful. It was powerful. It was a great job. I would take higher notes on the brief history of Ukraine, and put them in highlights, and then leave it alone. They want to hear about some of the big issues they don't understand or know about. Nobody knows about the starvation holocaust. Nobody knows, and nobody still understands why is Putin screwing it up? Because everybody was taking trips to Russia a year ago, and now they go, why is this wrong? So I would emphasize that more. I bet, early in the presentation, there was a lot of, and go to this link, and go to this website, go to this link. Not necessary. Just be you. Whenever I've asked you a question like I did tonight, all of a sudden you go, whoa, and you are locked on, and people are hanging on every word. You did a great job. Great job.
Thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I've been following everything pretty closely, and it's really good to be spend time with you.
Well, one person came down and said, man, it's about the issue, was really worried.
Yeah. I appreciate the references to the links, but yeah, you could just reference and move on through.
Yeah, and I was gonna say this, in my mind, I'm thinking Abraham,
I have not heard of
Yeah.
it.
right?
Yeah.
So if I just talk about me and what I think, that may not have
And that's what put the
Yeah.
credence,
So how can you
enough.
do that?
Maybe, but
So I don't know if it's not been done, I suspect.
yeah,
Reference.
yeah, and that Texas website was really good. I thought it was like, yeah, because if it was like a Ukrainian government website, that people might be skeptical of that. I thought that was great. Ukrainian Texas Historical Society. It's great. Yeah, so good. Yeah, maybe.
And I told you just make sure as we speak, it's gonna come to show.
Oh, I'm just inspired and because songs, and I wanted to play the Pink Floyd song, that they took off on
Really
this
did
one.
everything for you.
I mean, there was just so much.
I don't know.
We're supposed to be volunteers.
It's really
You know,
good song.
we're not putting our coat, that's
Yeah.
what it is, you know.
Here, let me find it on Spotify. Have you taken?
It's a, first of all, it's a novel and old war song
I
that
talked,
Ukraine had during World War
just got your
II.
email.
Gotcha.
And
Good job.
it was this
And I told the others,
and
you started with this.
did such a great job because it was just using notes and then he said, "Oh, well, it's very interesting." And then people heard that, and they didn't continue to do it. So, let me pull that up and see if I can find it.
I think maybe I found it.
You clearly.
It's Oi Uluji.
Yeah, this is like a